The roots of the one-on-one fighting game go back a long way. I was only a few years old when the genre was born, in fact. But in 1991, fighting games underwent a renaissance when Street Fighter II launched in arcades across the globe. Literally overnight, it became one of the most popular games the industry had ever seen. SNK doubled down on the genre itself, using its Neo Geo as a gateway to flood the market with countless new entries. Every company wanted a piece of the success that Street Fighter II had seen, leading to a deluge of new fighters in both the arcade and at home. Some of these games were actually quite good, giving Capcom's best a run for its money, while some were downright awful, shaming both the publisher and developer involved. In this episode, we will be taking a look at the very best fighting games on the Sega Genesis, a list of classics that remain very playable today. Of course, we have to have balance to appreciate just how good those games are, so for every great game, you're gonna get a terrible one as well. I hope you guys enjoy the best and the worst Sega Genesis fighting games. Before we begin, I want to set the stage proper so there's no confusion. I do not consider beat-em-ups fighting games. If it plays like Streets of Rage, it's not on this list. I also wanted to keep the idea of a fighting game as contemporary as possible, so I omitted games that were released before Street Fighter II. That means stinkers like Slaughter Sport are absent from this list. I also consider real-life sporting events to be its own thing, so I left off boxing and wrestling titles. Finally, if there were multiple releases in the same series, I chose my favorite entry. This kept the list from being dominated by Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter. Now that you know the rules, let's get started. In the years since its release, it's become pretty easy to find and play Samurai Showdown in its arcade perfect form. But in 1994, that was not an easy thing to do. When it hit the Genesis that year, I was really impressed with how it turned out. The full screen scaling is gone, of course, but it was quite colorful and the sprites are large and well detailed. Perhaps most impressive was the fact that it came on a 24 megabit cartridge, which was minuscule next to the whopping 118 megs of the Neo Geo original. That means you get a load of animation cuts, missing sound effects, and lose the fighter Earthquake entirely. Still, dude, for such a drastic reduction in size, Samurai Showdown on the Genesis is still a decent looking fighter that plays fast and faithful to the original. The Sega CD was its better in nearly every way, but this one is still well worth picking up. Growing up, I was a dedicated fan of DC Comics. I adored the many adventures of Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman. So when Justice League Task Force released in early 1995, I was definitely gonna give it a try. But man, I wish I really hadn't. This acclaimed published abomination was just awful. The thing is, it shouldn't have been. The Street Fighter inspired control theme combined with superheroes should have been a match made in heaven, but it turned out to be nothing but a shallow and depressing experience with bad graphics and terrible gameplay. The animation is poor for its 24 megabits of storage, the moves list is limited, and it just doesn't flow very well for a post-Street Fighter II release. I appreciate those of you that enjoyed the comic series, but this turd does no justice to it at all. In late 1995, Sony scored a hell of a deal to bring Mortal Kombat 3 home to the PlayStation as a 32-bit timed exclusive. That deal didn't include the previous console generation, however, which meant the Sega Genesis got it around the same time. And wow, did the developer Sculptured Software do one hell of a great job. Coming in at a whopping 32 megabits, it has a respectable amount of the animation, sound effects, and content of the arcade original. In fact, so well done was this port, I rated higher than the previous two games by a good measure. They really nailed the gameplay too. I mean, this is Mortal Kombat 3. Yes, the color takes a hit, and it doesn't sound as good, but this is still one hell of a great playing experience. I used to play it on my Sega Nomad often back then, and on that little screen, it felt like the arcade in the palm of my hand. After seeing this, you can't help but to get the impression that the first two games could have been done a lot better on the Genesis, proving that the team that does the work can be just as important as the hardware itself. I briefly met Shaquille O'Neal in real life once. He seemed a cool dude, so I feel kinda bad putting 1994's Shaq Fu on the worst list here, but I just gotta do it. It's bad, real bad. While the animation and overall graphics presentation is actually pretty good, the gameplay is a mess. It's so loose and janky, and the computer AI is a pain to deal with. Just getting your fighter into position to attack is a chore, and it's the kind of shallow that sees you getting knocked down from the simplest of moves. The developer Delphine Software was known for its outstanding rotoscoped animation techniques. That expertise worked great for a slow-paced adventure platformer like Out of This World and Flashback, but for a fighting game it proved detrimental to the playability. There's no getting around it. Shaq Fu is as rough as they come for 16-bit fighting games. When it comes to unique fighting games, you won't find much better than 1994's UFO Hacker Show. Developed by Treasure, it's a 4-player fighting game with a ton of moves, great visuals, and multiple planes to do battle on. The animation is solid and it has a large cast of characters. I mean, as far as console-exclusive fighting games go, this is the kind of stuff you wanted to see. It was never released in Europe or North America, so it took a while before I would finally play it. Tectoy ported it to Brazil in late 1999, and it does have a modern English translation out there if you're interested. This one had to be the inspiration for Guardian Heroes on the Sega Saturn. It so reminds me of the arena battles in that game. While many original console fighters tended to suck back then, this one turned out better than it had any right to be. There is an ongoing debate in the retro community about 1993's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters. Because Konami did two different versions for the Genesis and Super Nintendo, opinions vary on them both. But you know what? Both of them suck if you ask me. The choice of fighters sucked, the graphics sucked, the gameplay sucked. I mean, I just don't get the love for either one of these. Shallow combo systems and piss-poor special moves just make them so unappealing. Playing Street Fighter II on either console after playing this mess is like being freed from a prison of ineptitude and mediocrity. Konami was usually spot on with its releases back then, but this is a poor excuse of a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles title and well below their usual quality. To this day, I can only stomach a few minutes of its pain-inducing gameplay. In the land of 16-bit Neo Geo ports, 1994's King of the Monsters 2 was as unique as they come. While most just tried to copy the arcade originals, this radically changed the entire structure of the gameplay. Whereas the Neo Geo version was more of a side-scrolling beat-em-up with a fair bit of grappling-based gameplay, the Genesis incarnation is much more similar to a traditional fighting game. I love the changes, and it made for one of the better two-player fighters on the platform. Seriously, this is an absolute blast when playing against family and friends. Easy to pick up and learn, it even has new moves no other version has. Lots of people were split on this one, including reviewers at the time. Electronic Gaming Monthly really liked it, while GamePro eviscerated it. I expect this will be the case with many of you as well. Some will love it, others will hate it. I recommend you give it a go either way. That generation had a shortage of great kaiju games, so this one is well worth 5 minutes of your time. Ever wondered what a Vectorman fighting game would have looked like? Well, wonder no more, because Bhall's 3D is your answer. I really like the visual style here. The animation is really nice, and it does have at times some cool special effects with tons of sprites on the screen. The problem though is the gameplay. It's awful. The hit detection is just absurd. You get knocked down by stuff that seems to never even get close to you, and my god is the jumping bad. This one never amounts to more than getting knocked down 20 times while trying to get close to your opponent. It's the kind of fighter where in order to enjoy it, you have to find the 1 or 2 moves that dominate and just abuse the hell out of them. And oh my god, does the sound suck. I mean, the stuff here grates on the nerves at a level few Genesis games can compete with. Accolade even thought it a good idea to base some of the music on digitized speech. This thing came out in 1994, and there was just no room for something that looked, played, and sounded this bad. Some people say it has its charms. I say avoid it at all cost.
Oi! 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 Oi!
When Street Fighter II Special Champion Edition showed up on the Genesis in 1993, the world of fighting games would be changed forever on Sega's platform. It wasn't a case where there weren't any fun games in the genre before that, it's just that Street Fighter II elevated the experience so far above them, going back was a tough option. Despite its name, this was really a mixture of the Arcade Champion Edition and Turbo Hyper Fighting. Capcom did an excellent job on the visuals, coming in with sprites and backgrounds that were faithful to the arcade source material. Sprites were smaller and less detailed, and of course we got the standard color reduction, but overall it's very nice looking. The music was extremely well done as well. They were able to capture the overall feel of every track, making sure each battle played out to our expectations. The weak point was of course the speech. Most of the voices sounded scratchy, and good lord, that elephant stage was ear-shattering. I do still prefer this over Super Street Fighter II. While the extra content was nice in that one, I felt the music took a vicious turn for the worst. That makes Special Champion Edition the best fighting game on the Genesis in my book, and an absolute classic. So if Street Fighter II is the best fighter, what's the worst? No competition at all, it's time killers. This shit stain is punishment to all who dare power it up. You get some of the very worst graphics the system was capable of producing, and the sound ain't much better. But what makes this one a special kind of garbage is the atrocious gameplay. In the post-Street Fighter II environment, there is simply nothing else that plays this badly. You name it and it just doesn't work. Hit detection, balance, combos, nothing at all is fun in the slightest. There are few games that are this bad on the Genesis, and only its blood and gore will hold any appeal, however briefly that may be. I wanted to do a special look at Eternal Champions for a few different reasons. The first is that it's one of the few fighting games that Sega of America was responsible for directly. It was developed in 1993 by Sega Interactive, which was a US-based company previously known as Interactive Designs. They had done a few Genesis projects already, games like Green Dog and Tailspin. This was one hell of a contentious title at the time. There is a group out there that absolutely loved it, and there are those that despise it. After years of consideration, I have come to realize that there are a lot of interesting concepts here, but it's also got a ton of flaws that make them difficult to enjoy. Much of what was here tried to capitalize on gaming's newfound love of violence. Like Mortal Kombat, there was blood and fatalities, and there are loads of stages, fighters, and the story plays a pivotal role in its appeal. It's not easily accessible, however. The AI is tough, making the gameplay for newcomers rather unforgiving. It did sell extremely well in the US, and Sega of America had plans to really expand the universe. A sequel hit the Sega CD in 1995 and added tons more content and fixed some of the gameplay flaws of the cartridge version. Sega of America again planned an expansion for the series and wanted to do a Saturn version, but Sega of Japan slit their throats and canned the project in favor of supporting their arcade series like Virtua Fighter. With Sega's US operations being scaled back heavily as the company suffered heavy financial losses, Eternal Champions fell to the wayside and was never heard from again. The original Genesis version has some concepts I think many of you will enjoy, if the gameplay is learned and mastered, but I won't spare your feelings here. If you suck at fighting games, you should avoid this. All but the most skilled and dedicated will be shat upon and quickly disheartened. There is a good game here, but it's hidden under a lot of frustration and dedication. Fighting games for the most part were still in their infancy during the 4th generation. The arcade ports we saw were heavily cut back in most respects, and it wouldn't be until the following generation came along that we started to see some really impressive home conversions. That doesn't mean the old Genesis couldn't entertain you with a good fighter, however. The better games here are still very playable despite more impressive options available today. The key is the gameplay, and much of what we saw here plays as solid as you could have hoped. Of course, the bad titles really are bad. When a fighting game didn't play well, it could be a tough thing to experience. Games like Time Killers had virtually no redeeming qualities, and trying to play it in today's world of HD images and flawless arcade translations only deepens its woes. I recommend you try them all, however. You never know when something will appeal to you, regardless of what others may say about it. I'm Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.